I don't even know where to look. Welcome, everybody. My name is Andrea Boykowicz, and I'm the ED at Oakland Planning and Development Corporation. This is our monthly Let's Talk event. And every month we have a different topic that we invite community participation to discuss, to learn about, to ask questions. And we learn as much from you as you do from us. We really value your participation. I'm speaking to you from 294 Semple Street, and we have a number of neighbors who have joined us in here as well as online. And tonight's topic, we're talking about our what the process is for safe and sanctioned revelry in the streets. So every year, students are approaching graduation and spirits run high. It's spring, and that's as natural as anything. That's been the case since the dawn of time. It's particularly evident in Oakland, where students make up in many of the streets, especially in central Oakland, a really dominant presence on Oakland streets. And every year we have street parties, some of which are permitted, some of which are not. We have with us today members of a few different agencies at the city and also at the University of Pittsburgh. We're going to talk to us about the procedures by which applications for street party permits are reviewed and the criteria that folks use to determine how things can get permitted and what kinds of responses we have available to us, what kinds of procedures for responses we have available to us if parties get out of control. I really, forgive me, I'm looking at an inanimate object when I'm trying to address the camera, and it's a little disorienting. I'd like to be able to start this off potentially with Mr. Brian Katz, if that's okay. I know that we didn't really discuss an agenda item or order, but if it would be possible for you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what the Special Events Office does and how permits are received. And we can move from there to talk a little bit with the University of Pittsburgh about ways in which Pitt has been working with your office and public safety. So.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me tonight. Just to kind of give everybody a high-level overview without drilling down too deep into the detail, to have any event on public rights of way, whether it's a city park, a street, an alley, or in some cases even a sidewalk, obviously you need permission to use that city property and any resources that are associated with it, be it barricades or police or transit detours or things like that. So the process to obtain that permission goes through the Office of Film and Event Management, which is under the Department of Public Safety, which I oversee that office. And the permit process is open to anyone who wants to request a permission to close a street or use a park for an event, whether it's an individual, an organization, a nonprofit, a house of worship, or even a university like Pitt. Also gets permits from our office for things like Fall Fest and things like that. It is an online process through the City of Pittsburgh website. You can just go to pittsburghpa.gov. There's a events and recreation tab at the top, and film and event management is on the right. All of our information can be found there. But it's a two-step process for events. Block parties are different and much shorter, which I'll touch on in a second. But for a special event, it's a two-phase process. The first phase, which we call reservation of space, or phase one, is a short form application, which is basically the who, the where, the what, the when, and a high level overview of what activity is going to happen. That allows us to look at where you're requesting, what street, what park, when you're requesting it, a little bit about why you're requesting it, and be able to sign off on that. Yes, that space is available. Yes, that space is appropriate. Yes, we have the resources to support what you're doing, and sign off on the date and time and location before the applicant goes out and spends a bunch of money on musical acts or stages or vendor coordination, just to find out later that their date and location aren't available. So once we can verify through phase one, yes, the date's good, yes, the venue's good, yes, we can support the venue, we will approve it. That gives the applicant the comfort of knowing their date and location are secure and they can move forward with the rest of their planning. And releases what we call phase two to the applicant, which is really just the rest of the application, where you would fill out things like expected attendance, your safety plan, upload your site maps, which include things like where are your restrooms, how many restrooms, do you need generators, where is your stage going to be, things like that that our different reviewers will look at just to make sure that the design is safe, that things are going where they can go, whether it's a weight rated sidewalk or something like that. You don't put too heavy of a generator there, things like that. But all the details of the event that aren't connected to when or where necessarily. Um, Once that is all done and reviewed, then we issue a final permit, we issue a final invoice, and the event is essentially green lit to go. Now, reverse that a touch to the review process. With our online system approval, which is through which all that I just described occurs, we have what's called the Special Events Committee on the city side behind that, which my office oversees, and it is representatives of all the different bureaus and departments in the city, such as police, fire, EMS, but also Port or PRT, Pittsburgh Regional Transit, Public Works, PLI, Mobility and Infrastructure, Emergency Management and Homeland Security, different organizations like that. And for certain events, also the state at Point State Park or the SEA on the North Shore, city authorities in that sense whenever they're necessary to weigh in. We get these applications. Anyone who is pinged to review an event will have an opportunity to chime in on it. So if an applicant says, yes, I'm closing a roadway, that will trigger PRT review, that will trigger mobility and infrastructure review. And those individuals can click in the email they receive, open up the application right there, review what the applicant's offering, and then either approve it from their area of expertise, say that they need more information, and then message directly to the applicant, ask what that question is for feedback. They can also work through our office as the go-between to the applicant to get that information. And then once an event has all their dots, we call them green because that's how it appears on the screen. If there's 5 dots, there's 5 reviewers, and whatever color that dot is, we know where that reviewer stands in their process. Once it's all green, it can move to the approved status, and we go from there. We do meet every Tuesday in person to work through the ones that aren't approved in the time between our meetings. But that's the kind of review process. It goes before those agencies that are mapped in our system to need to review certain things based on the answers the applicant gives. We see this the whole time. We can edit that as it comes through, so it's not just completely system driven. We have manual control over it and can add reviewers that we feel need to look at it if they're not already there, because it fits most, but there are outliers that are different that the system might struggle to know where to send it, so we'll manually adjust it. But that's kind of the digital side and the human side mashed together to review these applications and go from there. The applicant on the applicant side has an account with our e-approval system. They can see this in real time, what the status is. They get notified when messages are posted so they can respond to them. They can see what status their application is in at all times, so they can follow up if they felt maybe it's been too long, it hasn't changed in a week. What status is my application in? So we can interact with them in real time through the system or through regular email, either way. But the system really is a great way to interact and upload documents and communicate and have everything in one location, and allow our reviewers the ability to read these things and review them and comment on them and interact with the applicants from anywhere, since it's all web-based and not something you can only access from a city computer. So that is the real quick high-level version of the long form thing. For block parties, it is shorter. Block parties are one phase. There's no 2 phases, and there's no upfront payment for a block party like this for an event. For an event permit, you pay $25 processing fee when you submit. For block parties, you do not. You only pay if it's approved. Block parties have a set list of criteria they have to meet. The application is largely just what street, from what intersection to what intersection, and when, and what activities are you looking to have. when those get submitted, we have, everyone knows how to, but there's one of our 3 staff that are dedicated to dealing with block party permits. They review them as long as they fit the criteria and there's no other outstanding conflicts like construction or it's on a detour of an existing closure or something like that. They'll approve it, and then it'll be sent to DPW to get their barricades scheduled for delivery and things like that. So block parties are shorter, but they do have a very defined set of criteria that an application has to meet, which I can either go into now or I can do later. I know that I could go on for days about this stuff, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but they are 2 different processes, but similar, just a little more specific criteria for block parties.
Maybe if you could just distinguish what is different between a special, like why is a special event versus why is a block party a block party? And maybe a little bit about where you can have block parties and where you can't.
Yep. So the where for block parties is part of the checklist. So block parties can only be authorized in residentially zoned districts. So if you live on an apartment above a storefront that's in a commercial district, unfortunately, that means that you're not eligible to have a block party. The applicant for a block party has to be a resident of the block being closed. So you can only request a block party on the street you live on. They are limited to 1 block in length. We do have a little liberty there with alleyways. If it's a very narrow alley that is a T intersection with a block, we may consider that 1 block if the alley isn't heavily traveled. That's like the one bit of subjectivity there is to it. But you have to live on the block. It has to be residentially zoned. It has to be 1 block in length. Houses of worship are included in living on the block. So churches sometimes and synagogues that want to have community events on the block that they are on, we do count those as block parties. Businesses, though, things like that are exempt, but houses of worship and residents both count. Block parties have to be on weekends or federal holidays. So Saturday and Sunday between the hours of 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. are the only hours that block parties qualify for, or federal holidays, Labor Day, Memorial Day, 4th of July, those all count. The only one we can include that's not a federal holiday is Halloween, because it allows neighborhoods to close blocks to allow kids to trick or treat safer. So we do allow block parties on Halloween because it's a public safety type thing, to let kids a little more freedom to move around their blocks. So that's the one exception to the federal holiday rule. But that's kind of what separates it. Block parties are meant to be for the residents of the block to hang out, to have a potluck dinner, to socialize, do things like that. There's nothing that says you can't invite your neighbors down the block or family members who live somewhere else to come and enjoy it. But it's not meant to be something where you're advertising online, come one, come all, bring your kids type thing. It's for the residents of the block. If it doesn't meet any of those criteria, you can still do it there, but now you've graduated into the special event permit, because if you don't live on the block or you want to do it on a time outside of 10 to 10 on a weekend or a holiday, it's a Friday night you want to do or something like that, you can still do it, but now you're getting a more highly scrutinized, longer form application. Special event permits, on the other side of that, things like nonprofits that want to have fundraisers, 5Ks, obviously, Picklesburg Marathon, Three Rivers Arts Festival, all the big stuff like that on city streets, uses city resources, has to be coordinated with the city. So those are all types of things that you would get general special event permits for. So block parties are really specifically for individuals. Special event permits are for larger civic type stuff.
So my understanding from the guidelines that I've seen, and please correct me if I'm wrong, to obtain a block party, it isn't just the case that you need to be a resident on the block, but that you need to have communicated with and obtained some permission from your neighbors to do this, to close the block. And I believe for that reason, right, that the original authorizing legislation for block parties confines the block party permitting to single-family residential areas, because that's where you can have some you can easily access the people who are resident on the block. You don't need to obtain the permission of every single resident in a multiple building and so forth. And it's also the case, as I understand it, that a block party permit allows the city to suspend open carry laws. Is that correct?
Open container, I think you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
sorry. Very different, of course. You're right.
yeah, just a touch different. That no open carry laws or anything like that change on any of our permits. It's subject to whatever the state laws. But yeah, I mean, it's you essentially you could sit at a folding table in the middle of the street and have a beer with your neighbor, and it doesn't you're not violating any city rules at that point because that's kind of the intent of the block party is to come out and socialize with your neighbors, have dinner, you have a barbecue. Obviously, that's within reason. If you take it too far and are causing disturbance, they can still, manage that situation if someone happens to call about it. But it does mean that you won't be stopped for, standing in your front yard or on the street having a beer with your neighbor. If you could repeat the first part of that, that was about the legislation
Whether or
or
not
the signatures. That was it.
yes.
The open carry question threw me off, so I missed this. I forgot the first part about it, but no, there's the signatures thing. Yeah, it says I forget the exact wording of it, but under certain circumstances, we can require I want to call it a petition per se, just saying that the majority of your neighbors support the idea of a block party, because obviously it takes one person to apply, and if no one else on the block wants it, we don't want to approve it just because one person thinks it's a good idea. There are lots of block parties that happen annually or semi-annually that we just know, so we don't require them to submit anything because they've been happening forever. So we don't require anything from as far as signatures go. If it's new or we hear from some neighbors that they got a flyer on their door that there's a block party and they have no idea what it is, then we may go back to the applicant and say, hey, listen, we got some feedback. Did you talk to your neighbors? We need to see proof that you talked to your neighbors. Can you please submit the just a list of signatures, name, printed name, signature, address, so we can see that the majority of people support this event. It doesn't have to be every single one. There's no science about how many is enough. But if there's 20 houses on the block and only 2 want it, we probably might not issue the permit in that scenario. We haven't run into that really ever. The majority not saying no. We have had some kind of wild card situations, but they were related to ones that you probably already know about in South Oakland neighborhoods. But for the large part, we rarely get new ones. A lot of these are annual, repeating neighborhood block parties that have a long history of being just fine, so we don't require the signatures.
So when you say that the applications have a review for public safety, can you maybe talk a little bit about that process? And maybe if it's a good moment, we can ask for public safety also to weigh in about how the police are informed and how they might be involved in reviewing an application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so with special event permits in general, police and fire and EMS sit on the committee, so they get the chance to comment on and react to any application that comes in through the special event process, part of which includes safety plans for large enough ones, evacuation plans, notification, if there's incoming weather, how do you tell your patrons that they might need a shelter, those type of things. So they see all that, and our emergency management agency sits on the committee as well, and they're really good at working with applicants on making sure that if their safety plan isn't sufficient or it's very basic, that they can say, listen, for you, this might be a good idea. This is what we're suggesting. Maybe your barricades need to be heavier barricades, stuff like that. So we advise people pretty good on best practices. If what they've presented might need to be beefed up or need a little, we'll call it coaching. When it comes to block party permits, they do not go through that review because they're very general, but they are reviewed in our office against that set of criteria. And, just because, like I said, a lot of them are repeating when we get new ones, they do get scrutinized a little heavier. We do reach out to the applicants and ask them some follow-up questions and things like that. And for the ones that might be in areas we're not used to or might seem like they need a little more attention, we'll just outside the system loop in feedback from the zone commander, depending on what zone it's in, or from our emergency management coordinators. And more recently, as it is with South Oakland, with some members of the pit community as well, just to get their feedback on it and what they feel about the application.
I just want to clarify that when you're talking about South Oakland, you actually mean Central Oakland. Since we
Yeah,
haven't had.
central, yeah. The Bates Atwood type corridor, South Oakland is probably a lot deeper than that. I apologize, but yeah, South Central in that area, the Boulevard of the Allies, Bates Street corridor.
So that is an area that does trigger a little bit additional review about the safety concerns and how you would loop in.
Over the last
zoning.
few years, if we have suspicion that it's a university student that submitted the application, we'll give it a little more attention.
There's a number of folks who are on the call right now who are representing public safety, and I would just like to kind of like open it up as an opportunity, if there's any comment or if there's any additional information that would help us to contextualize your process. I see Director Schmidt, you joined there, and Officer Colello. If there are any comments you'd like to add?
The only
Sure,
comment
yeah,
I'd
sorry,
like
I
to have
was
it.
a little,
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Schmidt.
anyhow. Yeah, I'm not sure what all Brian covered, but, we have been looking more and more closely at anybody we believe to be a student. We're also working with universities on some processes around the law department. That when a student applies, we're gonna start requesting, letter of support from the university, making sure they're supportive of it and aware of it so they can provide any input as well. That's worked for a few of them so far that have come across that ended up not happening because of that. But we are here to work with you all to ensure the neighborhood is still a neighborhood, not overtaken by random block parties that cause all of us problems in the end. So, but I'm here to answer any other questions you may have. Brian is our subject matter expert. He probably can cover things even better than I can. But thanks for having us, though.
No, thank you so much for joining. Officer Colillo, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Did you have something you wanted to add?
I did. So how would you tell if it's a student or not when he applies for that permit? Do they identify themselves as a student?
Sometimes they use their student email address, and just based off the street and our knowledge of the composition of the street, we may ask. We may look. There's indicators. We'll put it that way. It's tough to verbalize them off the cuff, but there's certain things that we can say. We know that this is an apartment. We've gotten applications from that address before. Specifically to the applications that have come in for Wellsford Street. Out of the 5 or 6 years that's happened, I think the same address has applied 3 times. So we know it's a house that students rent. So it's just one of those things that if we want to check, we will, and we'll just call and ask them. And in some instances, and we've done this with CMU students as well, ask them to come in and talk to our committee so they can sit in the room with our public safety officials and things like that and make sure that they understand what it is that they are asking of the city, which tends to open some eyes a little bit.
What kinds of things trigger you to reach out to the university to determine whether or not that is a student and that the university can approve?
Pretty much anything in the South Central Oakland area, just because we've been having issues with students getting permits in that area. So if it's in any of those neighborhoods, we more likely will look at it and see who the applicant is. Either just by asking them. Sometimes we'd ask the university. I know Jamila and James are on here. We did that with a block party or a special event permit request we got when we checked with them, and they confirmed that it was a student. So just a couple different ways.
Jamie, if you would have, if you'd like to be able to contextualize for the university, not to put you on the spot, or would you like to? Justin.
Yeah, sorry, Brian, Justin Danley with ECA in the room too, so as far as, when what Brian's mentioned about communication, things like that, that's something that, I guess I could talk a little bit about pitch process with James on as well, but our government relations and advocacy office would receive applications if they're going through the university. And so, like, for example, when we did, legal batch, whatever it is, that goes through GRA, the GRA office, and they submit the permit application on behalf of whatever student group. And so, for example, like big batch that is students, so facilitating it through their program council, it's a formal organization, that sort of thing. And so those are usually, we already have eyes on those are communication, that sort of thing. But when it comes to students, requesting on their own, we have had in the past students that have sort of tried to come through our system, and that's sort of easy to head off, and we just sort of talk to them and ask them the questions that we know the city's gonna ask them. And usually that either deters folks, or they will apply for a permit directly through the city without going through any sort of bid process. And so, and that's the case, that's where, communications just between the folks that are reviewing the applications and engagement with affairs, government relations and advocacy, just to sort of identify and let us know. And so, for example, recent application, Brandon reached out, shared the location. We were able to sort of listen in on the session with the committee and stuff, so that we were sort of aware of that. And the students are where they're located and those sort of things, and can learn in that sense. And so, but the problem is you mentioned and Brian mentioned, when they when folks try to get around processes by using Gmail or whatever it is, and so that can be difficulties in identifying it, but hopefully again, when we do it, identify it, we can address it with city partners.
Let's see how to phrase what comes next. So as we were saying earlier here, a block party allows the city to suspend its rules on open container. Does the same apply to a special event permit?
It can. Alcohol rules are goofy. Pennsylvania is very difficult to manage alcohol in. But the PALCB does have guidance on alcohol at events, and that's generally what we have events follow. If alcohol is going to be sold at an event, we'll use the Jam on Walnut as a good example. They have alcohol sales. One of the things that are important to the LCB with that is a defined perimeter, so that they know where the consumption can take place. That event in particular is really good at having signs on the barricades that say no alcohol beyond this point, so people know where the borders of the Jam on Walnut event are. Bartenders have to be ramp certified. The same things apply that would apply to any establishment vending alcohol. The people actually doing the vending have to be licensed by the LCB through either an offsite catering license or I think it's called a special occasions license. It's the same type of thing a caterer would get to like vend alcohol at a wedding that's outside of a venue that has its own liquor license. It's the same process. They go through the LCB process on their own to do that. The LCB will always want to see an approved permit from the city to issue the license for that. That's a request we get all the time from people, that they need their permit so they can get the LCB license done, because that process is far longer than our process is. So to have alcohol at a permitted event, it is a tougher process, and it generally goes through the LCB, especially if it's sold. If it's sold, for sure.
I'm sure you're going to anticipate my next question, right? So if that's the case, if in fact there are specific rules that prohibit alcohol at special events, absent LCB certified processes of approval and so forth, how is it that every party that we've seen in Oakland here devolves very quickly into a frat party with a whole bunch of underage kids really drunk, and it takes a very long time for public safety to be able safely to disperse groups of kids who are partying in that way? Does this process work in order to be able to prevent that kind of situation?
So it's a tough question for a few reasons. One, when we receive an application, we have to give every application the same review, right? We can't do things differently for one group than we do for another. It's the same reason why if we change a rule for, say, block parties and say, well, block parties, you no longer can drink outside, it has to apply to block parties citywide. It can't just be specific to a neighborhood, right? And when we review an application, we generally have to go by what the applicant says in the application. We can't assume anything. So we can't deny an application on an assumption. We have to have a provable reason or defensible reason to deny an application. Past history counts. So if something happens, we permit it, they were untruthful about their intention, which happens. If they do a bunch of things that they said they weren't going to do, or that their permit prohibited, it can be shut down. They can be prohibited from receiving permits in the future. There are repercussions to it, including fines for certain things. But once a permit's issued based off what they say they're going to do, and we don't have a defensible reason to not issue the permit, then it becomes what happens when people get there. And what tends to happen if they're not truthful in their intentions, or people hear, hey, there's a block party on Wellsford Street, even if the applicant has well intentions, people are going to swarm there and they're going to do what they do there. It's a college neighborhood. It's on a university campus. Once that happens, well, it's
Hold on.
near the campus, but
Exactly where the EMI boundaries are.
yeah,
What we're talking about are residential neighborhoods that, it's true, happen to be dominated by student rental, but they are not the university campus. This is all
Right.
off-campus activity.
sure. But I guess the short way is to say it, any event we give a permit to could devolve if the right factors come into play, right? That's why they won't receive permits in the future if something like that happens. I believe in the case of some of the South Oakland or Central Oakland issues that have happened in the past few months, the city's looking at ways to, recoup some cost to that from the applicant. I know the university spoke to the applicant about that, and stuff like that. But like, as far as my office is concerned, I've got 3 staff that work 9 to 5 to adjust the permits. We don't have an enforcement arm, so we cannot go out and check event sites or block parties to make sure they're doing exactly what their permit says. There is only 4 of us to handle 1,000+ permits a year, so we just don't have that capacity. So that's when it becomes, if they're setting up in the event and all of a sudden they're rolling kegs down the street, and someone was to check, and if it's on in Oakland neighborhood or anywhere near campus, and Pitt police say, well, we have a copy of their permit, there's supposed to be no alcohol, public safety can step in and shut it down, and then that's what happens. Once you get on the ground, it's going to have to be reactionary. Unfortunately, we can't assume what an applicant's intentions are until we have concrete evidence, which college kids are pretty good at giving us when it comes to social media sometimes, because they put whatever that's on their mind on social media, and then we see the flyer for the permit we just gave, which says BYOB on it. Well, there's the red flag. We can act on that, and we can say, hey, listen, all your advertising is saying alcohol, all your advertising is saying bans when you said there were no bans. Now they could be in violation of their permit terms, and we can revoke their permit, which we have done on a few occasions during my time here, including in the Central and South Oakland neighborhoods, when we saw that social media, and revoked permits from events that had already had approved ones, based on that fact.
So maybe I can invite Officer Colello to talk a little bit about how, what response looks like if an event gets out of hand. Is that fair?
So when we are notified about these events, we do monitor them, and we realize, and I'd have to ask Brian that they usually have a limit on the permits. Is that correct? The limit of participants
We
when
ask
they apply for a permit. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we ask expected attendance. It's what the applicant thinks is going to come. It's rarely ever accurate, but it's a planning tool that
Yeah,
we use.
no, you're right. This kid's put down 100 people,
Yeah.
and before you know, there's 400 or 500 people there.
Right,
That's when
they're
the
going to
police
estimate low typically.
Yeah. That's when public safety usually moves in, when the crowd goes beyond control like that.
And
Yeah.
then what happens if it does go out of control in that regard?
Well, you're talking now. You're gonna have to talk to Zone 4. Somebody is Commander Vanasse here. Anybody from Zone 4 on this tonight?
I think that Director Schmidt is the representative
Okay.
of public safety at this moment.
Maybe he'd like to address that question. These are city streets.
Yeah,
Dr.
sorry.
Schmidt.
Yeah, sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting there. Yeah, essentially, so all of our commanders have access to the special event permits. They know what the permits are. They then would have lieutenants or sergeants that are on duty make that call. And then with support, in this case from University of Pittsburgh or CMU, we would enact the shutdown of the parties or the events. But we have been trying to work to be a little more proactive about that. Like Brian said, trying to do a little more research. We've also, specifically, I know one of the questions you asked, what happens around this. So I'll use the St. Patrick's Day Ginger Run as an example. That was permitted for an event. I don't remember exactly. I want to say 200 people or so, Brian, right? To have a run. Yeah. Have a run. We were watching it on the cameras. I was there watching it on the cameras. Once it grew too big, we called the organizer and said, your event's too big. We're going to be shutting it down. And then after the fact, what we've done now, my assistant director actually just got everything together this week, is we have bills from DPW, from police, from fire, from EMS, and we're going to be sending them, the organizer, a bill for that. That's something new that we just got through council last year, I want to say, maybe the year before, that we can, if an event falsely presents what they're doing, we can bill them for those services after the fact. There's also some circumstances in which, if they don't have a permit, we can bill them plus add a 25% fee to that. Those are some of the things we've been doing. We've also been talking to council members. I don't know if anybody from Councilman Charlin's office is on or not. They're there.
She's in the office, or in the audience here.
In the audience. Okay. I did talk to Councilman Charlin about an idea that we have around, which we're working through law, so don't hold me to this yet, but we are working through the potential that if you are not the property owner, which obviously, we can find out who the property owners are pretty easily. If you're not the property owner, you need some sort of a letter from the property owner saying they are okay with, a block party happening. And
Director,
trying to enforce those things.
I will compliment the city police, and Pitt Police went in, like you said, you monitored that Ginger Run, and it was getting out of control with the amount of participants. You shut that down really quickly and without any major incidents or minor incidents. I mean, the city police, Pitt Police, you just lined the streets and cleared the students off of the streets. There wasn't any problems after that. So they did quite a good job, our director, your city police.
Thank you. Yeah. But that did take a lot of resources. We had to pull folks from across the city.
It did. All the motorcycles were there.
Yeah, so those are the things. That's why we want to start, that's why we enacted some stuff with council approval in the fee schedules, that we can retro bill folks for that sort of thing, because pulling those resources from across the city means other areas aren't covered the way we want them to be. And it adds things, and it does cause a lot of distress to the public. I will also say, some things over the past couple of years have changed with the law department. Previous solicitors would not allow us to deny a permit solely based on the address. If it was a different name, the new solicitor, who's not that new anymore, she's been in place for 3 years, but she agreed, and her team's supportive of us using past activity from that address as a reason to deny. And there is an appeal process, but nobody's really gone through that. When we've denied them, they've kind of given up. So that is kind of our process that we're looking at in the future. We are also doing a little more communication with the commanders to make sure they understand they have the full authority. If I'm not present, they have the full authority, or their lieutenants or sergeants have the full authority, as long as they can show, that the party is obviously not following whatever the permit might be, if it's permitted. I will also say there's times that we don't, such as the porch party that happened the day before the ginger run. That was not a permitted event at all. That was not a sanctioned event. We weren't even aware. The first 911 call we got was after the porch roof collapsed. So those are things we also ask the communities to please, if you see a party, you see something going on, please call 911 so we can at least be aware, get eyes on it. If it's on private property, it's a little harder for us to do anything other than a noise ordinance violation. But that one also wasn't just on private property, but between two houses in an alleyway. So we do rely on the community to kind of be our eyes and ears when we're not always there. And I know that one was also kind of a perfect storm because we had a lot of Zone 4 officers dealing with the protest at the time, so they weren't doing quite as much patrol. But once we did find out about it, obviously that was after the roof collapsed, but if we would have known about it ahead of time, we may have been able to shut that down. But I think between us and the university working together, and I see Jimmy Williams is on, he's our government affairs folk, him and I talk frequently. We are working together to see what we can do to ensure people can be safe, people are not impacting the neighborhood negatively, and as well as I know Brian talks to the pit team, folks that you have in the room there with you as well. So it is really about communication and coordination from everybody. So we ask even communities, if you hear about something happening or you see some flyers posted, feel free to send those over to us. We've had other neighborhoods that we've done the same thing. They apply for a block party and then we see them advertising a house party and charging a fee and saying, free alcohol, those sorts of things. We will act to shut those down when we know about them. But, the city's large. As Brian said, he's got 3 people. We don't always know what we don't know. So we do ask the folks to do anything we can to let us know. And don't ever think you're a bother if you're calling us or reaching out to us.
So it kind of seems like the city and public safety are a little bit at a disadvantage, where students are pretty adept at not, putting anything on paper, not specifically knocking on their neighbors' doors or talking with anyone who isn't a student. There's a fair amount of word of mouth. There's a fair amount of social media touching. There are, Snapchat conversations that never happened. And that presents a kind of a difficulty if there are not sufficient tools for the city to be able to distinguish between what is a permitted activity, what is not permitted activity, what kind of reliability the applicant might present, and what other kinds of information are out there. Does the city need a different, or maybe some supplementary process to just, have the information available to allow you to make a better informed decision about whether or not something is an appropriate permit application, what kinds of alerts you're gonna need? Because a fair amount of what you've said, Director Katz, you've talked about, well, it depends, or we make a judgment, or it can be, or we may, et cetera. And that's pretty squishy. And I can appreciate that you have a pretty limited, set of resources available to you to make those kinds of determinations. My question is, does the process need to be modified in such a way that it would make it easier for you to have, a slightly more solid process in your office?
Well, we're always modifying it a little bit. I mean, this conversation alone is part of the learning process and what can we do different when it comes to Oakland permits, right? What was pointed out before, how do we know if it's a student? We don't, but with the South and Central Oakland neighborhoods, there are a lot of student renters, whether they're on campus or not. So just that alone makes us look a little deeper, communicate with the university, see how they feel about it. Anything that's officially a university event is going to come through student affairs, who generally puts in the permits. So we obviously know those are legitimate. So we kind of adapt as it goes. Some of the process is rigid. Some of the things are in city code and would take an active council to change. So those are kind of limiting a little bit. But I would say that, I wouldn't call it a non-committal approach that I was taking before about some of the ways we can review things, is that there's kind of a hard, like a line we have to toe. We can't do for one applicant what we don't do for another. Everyone has to be treated with the same lens, right? By looking at a student applying for a permit and treating them differently, someone could argue that, we're unfairly discriminating against students because they're students. That's kind of a line we have to toe. Making assumptions about what an applicant's intention are with no real evidence to the contrary. Now we're assuming what this person's intentions are. Our intuition's pretty good, but at the same time, if someone says, well, I want to have a 1-block race with people with red hair because it's St. Patrick's Day weekend, and there's nothing to the contrary, we can't just say, no, we don't believe you, right? We can't, that's not an approach we can take necessarily. As the director said, we have a little more latitude than we have in past years to say, well, maybe every time we get something like this, it never goes well. So as long as we have support of the law department, maybe we don't go down that road this time. But we have to rely on the advice of our legal team at that point. So it does sound soft, but again, it's a line we have to toe. With block parties, it's a pretty solid criteria, based on everything I laid out before. For event permits, which the Ginger Run was, my office actually doesn't make the final determination. It's the committee that does on that. We inform, we share the information. I share my years of experience and my thoughts on the matter. In certain scenarios, we'll bring in Director Schmidt to give his opinion and or give the final ruling on what the committee's 50-50 split on, because ultimately the committee is a public safety entity. It can be difficult in the position we're in sometimes to make those determinations based on the factors we're presented, since we can't really assume anything, if that makes sense.
Yes, but I think that you're making my point for me, which is there information, for instance, that is missing from the requirements that I'm not putting it on you to change. I'm saying, is there something that, community members can do, working with their city council members, working with city planning, working with Department of Public Works to develop a process that would make it easier for you to make that kind of a determination and rely less on your specific personal judgment and experience. Not that those aren't valuable. I'm just saying, all of us have experienced there's turnover, and it's not always you, and it might be somebody else in your office, and so that we can make sure that you have the information that's available to you. It has some reliability. Is there, for instance, an age limit? Do you require that a permit applicant be of a certain age? Is there a proof of age that you ask somebody to submit? Are there other kinds of documentation that would be appropriate for any applicant to submit that would make it easier for you to tell what's up?
Well, like the director said, the whole, needing their landlord's permission if you're not the property owner is a good step in the first direction, because that's something we tried a few years ago and didn't work. So it's nice to hear that might be coming back. I don't know if we can put an age limit on it. I mean, there's legal consent things at the end of the application that you have to check. There's no age question. I'm not even sure if we can technically ask that question, but that would be a question for our legal department. It's never something we have asked. I don't know what that would add or anything. But I would, just to clarify part of what you said, very little of this is personal judgment. It's all based on the answers the applicant provides. So, like using what Officer Colello brought up, like the attendance. If an applicant replies and says, we're going to have 200 people, we're going to plan for 200 people. If they think their event's going to be the greatest thing that's ever happened and they say 1 million people are coming, we're gonna plan for 1 million people, but they're not gonna like the bills they're gonna get, right? So we have to kind of take what they give us and work with it. Now, like I said, the personal intuition part comes in saying, well, this guy's applied for permits before, it's never gone well, we need to look a little deeper into this. Or every time there's an event on this street, X thing happens. Like, that's more of a historical context. But that's kind of what comes with this job, just kind of looking at the things that we get, what's happened in the neighborhood before, how has the neighborhood reacted, what has this applicant done in their other events, what have they done in other cities. If it's something where they say that they've performed events in other cities, we've gone as far as checking with our counterparts across the country if it's an event that has gone to other cities, which has resulted in an event being denied due to terrible experiences other cities have had with that applicant. But just since I just thought it out loud, I mean, just I want to make sure you guys do know that this isn't necessarily a Central South Oakland or even North Oakland problem. We deal with this citywide sometimes. And we do have applications where we know that, the applicant isn't being truthful, or that they haven't been truthful in the past, and we have to look a little deeper into it. But as far as knowing these things, since like I mentioned, we don't have an enforcement arm, every time, these conversations happen or someone brings something up, I always tell them, because we're so limited, we don't know if no one tells us, right? Because I'll hear feedback sometimes by saying, how are you letting this happen again? Well, what do you mean what happened last time? And then I get a list of things that happened a year ago that no one ever told us, because everyone in the community talked about it, but no one ever relayed it to the city, right? So I've always been a proponent of, like the director said, if you see it, if someone puts a flyer on your door and you're not sure if it has a permit, just ask, we'll tell you. If you have a question about something that's happening, Public Works is dropping off barricades on the corner on a Friday afternoon and you don't know what it's for, shoot us an email. We'll find out pretty quickly. Outside of construction, I don't think anyone else, permits street closures other than us and Domi. So it should be a pretty quick turnaround, and essentially feedback. If it's something that looks like an event went perfectly fine, but people were, drinking water out of a hose on the street, which happens, or, doing things that we might not notice, send them our way. We'll address them with the applicant. We'll look into them. We'll note them for the next time. But really, the people that are experiencing the event are our eyes and ears, since we can't be there to see that, and that will help inform us for the next time around that someone brings an application to the table.
Alicia Carver, you had something that you wanted to really on.
Hey, Brian, it's Alicia. I'm curious, for the larger event permitting approvals, is there an occasion where the special event committee requests what the promotional materials will look like for an event?
It's kind of hard to hear. It's very echoey.
Alicia's question is there a situation in which the committee would request examples of the events publicity, so flyers or posters or anything like that?
There's an entire section of the application about public outreach, asking if they've begun public outreach, and if they have, how, whether it's a door knocker, a flyer, social media. If they have a flyer, there's an opportunity to upload a copy of it. If they say they haven't started public outreach, we will most likely reply to them and tell them that they need to, or remind them that there is a notification requirement for an event, which is, I think, a 3-block radius around the venue, 3 business days before, at least, I think. So if you get a permit, you are required to notify the neighbors within a 3-block radius of that permit. Now, that is for a special event, not a block party. So we do ask all that public comment, or the public outreach information from the applicant, and we do ask to see what they're putting out there, because we do have events that say they do it, but it's a single sheet of paper with a 1-sentence in Arial font saying we're having an event Saturday, with no contact information, no context. And we will tell them there are things you need to include, because if you put that on someone's door as a notification, you have to put a contact number and email, so if they have a question, they can ask it. You need to put times, you need to put dates. Simply saying we're having an event on Saturday is not sufficient, but they are required to notify.
Well, okay, so let's use this as an example, right? The Ginger Run on Semple. I am a homeowner and a resident within 3 blocks radius of that event. I had no idea that it was happening until DPW was setting up the barricades on the street. And so what kind of verification do you have available to make sure that people are in fact doing things in advance?
That's again one of the limits of our office, right? We have 3 people. They might say, yes, we're doing it. Here's a copy of our flyer. We have no way of knowing whether they actually walk around and put those on door handles. If someone gets one and emails us and says, hey, this was on my door, what is this? 1, we know that they did do it, and 2, we can expand on that. But unless someone like you tells us right now that that didn't happen, we don't have staff to go out and check that. We don't have people to spot call or check doors and ask people, hey, did you receive a notification? Not for the volume of things that we do every year. That would be an absurd task for us to take. So that's one of those things where we find out after the fact a lot of the times that outreach didn't happen. And in this case, I believe the applicant did mention that I'd have to go back and go through their application. But I do believe that they said that they were doing public outreach. And that's why we didn't ask to see the copy of the outreach. I think they did upload it eventually, but again, we can't go out and verify that.
So,
Yeah.
please.
Sorry, that was something I was going to bring up. So some of the things we are looking to change would be to allow more enforcement, even if it is after the fact. But those are things like, so if we would want to tell folks, if you fail to notify or you don't provide sufficient proof, we can, cite you for that. Right now, we don't really have a penalty if they don't provide proof, or if we find out they didn't notify folks. It's just within the regulations, but there's nothing in city code that allows us to do any enforcement, so to speak, in a way that would fine or levy any fees to folks. That would be required through council. So as we make these changes, we'll be working with council. Brian's kind of done a complete rewrite of some of the code around special events. Also to help separate it so we can't have folks claiming it's a First Amendment event and it's not, and it's a special event. There's a lot of crazy things that have happened around these things over the years. Some of this was due to a civil rights suit the ACLU brought against the city. So we're trying to make sure that the code is very clearly separated between what is a civil rights First Amendment right versus you just want to have a party on your block. You have to give us all these things. So that as we change those, that is where we can use, the community support to make sure you guys, we'll be talking to the council staff as well, but, to explain what's going on, why this is important, why we need more teeth, so to speak, in that we can actually start to cite people, send them city fines, those sorts of things for failing to comply or not providing proof in advance.
The city does have available a registry of registered community organizations, right? So city planning, for instance, maintains this, and the service area boundaries of each of the RCOs is very clearly understood. Could it be, for instance, if you're inviting, community support to help you with enforcement and advice and guidance and so forth, could it be among the steps that, you require the event organizers that they notify their RCO, your RCO is, which is something that functions, and then we can tell you whether or not we got it and whether or not, we have eyeballs on the ground to help you and to help inform public safety. Is that something that would be within existing code? We could ask you to do?
I'd have to check. It's not a bad idea. It just becomes one of those questions of, how much weight does the community impact have, right? That would be something that someone would have to tell us, that we wouldn't be able to make that.
It's among the criteria for becoming a registered community organization that city planning satisfy itself that in fact, actually, the applicant organization does have the capacity to communicate with the neighbors and to be able to, advertise events and to be able to, get information out there and to contact residents directly if needed. So that's among the things that one is required to demonstrate one is capable of doing.
Yeah, and it's probably something we can look into. I'd be open to that conversation, seeing what that could look like.
Yeah, I actually do
Yes.
think that's probably a really good idea. I
Yeah.
haven't thought about that, but I mean, the RCOs, that is kind of what you all do. And it does provide us with a more official, again, that, and some will have to run through law to see how we do that, or if we need to enact have council add that to the code, that the RCOs are notified, just to make sure we're covered on that. And it would just be a notification. It wouldn't be necessarily you guys weighing in. I think that would be helpful, because then you could at least let us know, hey, we reached out to the community. They said they haven't heard anything. Or maybe that's even just part of their reach out. Like we tell the organizer, you must reach out to the RCO. You must show proof that you reached out to the RCO.
I
But
think
yeah, I think it's definitely worth more discussion. So I appreciate that.
what you just mentioned, Director, is probably the easiest way to do that is in that public notification section of the application that part of the community outreach is notification of, impacted residents and businesses in a 3-block radius, and an email of the flyer to their registered RCO email address, whatever's on file. We have the ability to include that information so that people can look up, if they're not sure what it is, or in some cases, I'm sure what their RCO is, what their local community group is, or which one they should be emailing. It shouldn't be terribly hard to make that information available, and in a way that they can just run their finger down the list and know which one to email. I don't think that would require changing anything to do that. That would just be text we can add in the existing application. But Director, you and I can discuss that later. But I think that is a pretty straightforward thing to do.
The city maintains an interactive map as an overlay in the GIS maps that it has, in which if you type in your address, you can find out who your RCO is.
And we can link directly to that in the application.
Right.
Yeah, we have the ability in our application in the top of each section to give instructions with links to any additional things they need, like for road types. There's a DOMI map that we can link to that people can see what type of roadway, whether it's arterial, collector, residential, whatever. In that section, we can very easily drop that link to that map with instructions on how to search their address, so they can pull up that information. So that would take us 10 minutes to add to the application.
Right, quick question. If there's about a misalignment with the permit process, so let's say, they said that they notified, neighbors, we find out through RCO notification or whatever is the process moving forward that they did notify neighbors. Is that something that would prohibit them from filing for a permit then in future years? Or future areas or anything like that, either through the address can no longer apply for a permit for X amount of time, or the individual.
I'd want to check on that one, just to see, because certain things might be, everyone looks at them differently, but could be a scale of what a severe thing is, like being told not to close a street until 6 p.m. after rush hour and then throwing up the barricades at noon is an egregious thing that can disrupt traffic and cause issues, and now there's buses stuck and stuff like that. That's like a fine probably, and you don't get permits for a period of time. Not notifying the neighbors, I don't know if that would rise to that level of not getting permits, but it would have to be probably a conversation to say, like, okay, if they're required to notify by, say, Wednesday evening if the event's on Saturday, and we find out on Thursday evening that someone on the street where the event is hasn't received the notification yet, what does that mean? Do we give them the ability to rectify that? How do we address that, right? No way I can come up with that answer right now, but it's a question. Yeah, that's something we can maybe see if our law department has input or other stakeholders, and say, like, what would be an appropriate penalty. Full withdrawal of the permit, I don't think that would rise to the level of, but could probably think about that a little bit.
So I just wanted to jump on to, I have to go. I have another meetings, unfortunately. So I think Brian's going to be on for a little longer. I do appreciate everything, but if you guys have any other questions for me, please feel free to reach out. Brian can get you my email, or and then Alicia from Councilperson Charlene's office. We talk frequently as well. So we're happy to do whatever we can. If you have any further feedback or ideas, please reach out to us. And thanks for having us on, giving us a chance to chat.
We really appreciate your time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good night.
Good night. I just wanted to sort of re-up my invitation to Jamie, Jimmy, if you have anything that you'd like to add from the university's perspective. I know that it has instituted, you know, some additional procedures for review when they're alerted that it might be their students involved in applying for a permit. I don't know if either of you is able to speak.
Hey, Andrea. Yeah, we're here. Sorry, we had a school-wide art festival and book fair. Our children are at the same school tonight. So we've had several rounds of internal meetings to really just sort of get back into practice of how it is we're going to handle things. The first thing that we're going to institute is now there's just going to be sort of a standing internal committee that is proactively meeting each February and August to get ahead of the good weather, good feeling rush, right? So if we're meeting in February, if we're meeting in August ahead of students getting back, we can be sure that we know who's going to play point, who's going to be responsible for some of the proactive measures. And we're also building into that process an outreach to Brian, who we've already met with, right? To just say, hey, here goes a reminder. We're here at your service. If you're getting any permits that are hitting Central and South Oakland, right? We're here to confirm whether or not that might be a university affiliate and to be your partner in getting to that applicant, those groups quickly to push them back into our institutional process. So that's one thing that we're going to be sort of standing up into next year. The next is we're going to be requiring that students have to work through government relations office in order to file a permit, right? So if we find out that they're an affiliate and the city flags for us, right? They use their Gmail, but they filed, we can confirm whether or not they're a student. We can reach out to them and say, hey, you actually have to file through government relations. And government relations is now requiring an administrative or academic sponsor in order to move that permit forward. So they aren't able to do it just on sort of the strength of whatever cultural niche that they believe they are going to be celebrating with their permits. So GRA is going to tighten that up. We have a senior leader within the Division of Student Affairs that has met with our Student Organization Resource Center to re-emphasize that, right? Because that was also part of the process with Ginger Run, that we wanted to sort of close that loophole, that the Division of Student Affairs would not be supporting students in their efforts to work around GRA. The next is that we are going to we're going to honestly get fire marshals involved more often when we believe that there is a potential safety concern, knowing the condition of some of these sort of accessory to home operations in Central and South Oakland, right? We know that when you walk down Wellsford, there are some dangerous spots and how many people should or should not be on a porch. So if we can get a social media photo, if we can get somebody on site, in addition to relying on pit police, public safety broadly, this actually came from Sergeant Brooke Riley from the Community Relations Unit, that we think that if we can flag in the fire marshals, they might also be able to shut things down due to safety concerns for our students, maybe more quickly than a response to just going over a permit number might be, right? Because what we have seen is a permit for 100 gets to 700 sometimes before things get shut down. And we think we can do better than that. So that's something that Jimmy has agreed to take on, is just seeing if we can get fire marshals on site, seeing if we can get ahead of those sort of big swells of numbers. Another thing that we're going to be doing is we've got more information about the application process. And now that we've actually been able to sit in on the pre-decision hearing, we know what types of questions to offer internally to students that are interested in hosting special events before it is they're even tapping city resources. So we're thinking about how it is we can come up with flyers of, did you think about the cost of the porta potty? If you thought you were going to get away with sawhorses, you're not, right? This is how much tag and tow costs, so that students aren't thinking that just the cost of filing for a permit is the true cost of hosting an out of control event. And then lastly, what I'll offer is that we're really just moving to a position of, hey, if you're looking to have a legitimate event, let's host it on campus. This is what our student unions are for. This is what our our resources are for. So let's stop pushing into the neighborhood um, and hosting cultural events that really do seem like large parties. So we're going to be trying a lot of different things, but I hope that's helpful. Jimmy, I don't know if you had anything else.
And thanks, Jamie, and thanks everyone. I'd like to thank the city, Brian and Lee, and all the other city officials who were on here. I think everyone kind of hit all the different touch points on how we're moving forward. I've been at the university for over 20 years, and this social media thing has evolved into something that our administration is actually able to kind of follow as well. And we're just trying to keep the lines of communications open within the different departments and in the student groups, and try to rely on everyone just to kind of pitch in and kind of be a part of this whole process. But it's always evolving, and we're trying to keep up with how things are moving along. And, we're just trying to do the best we can to make sure that everyone's happy and not to infringe on people's rights. And, parties are going to happen, things are going to happen, but it's all about public safety and everyone being safe while they're doing, their celebrations or whatever they have going on. So, but thanks everyone.
Thank you. Uh, I don't mean to call you out, Elena, but I happened to notice that Millie was on for a bit and dropped off. Was curious, as the other residential RCO in the room, whether you had any input from the Oak Cliff / South Oakland perspective you'd like to offer, or if you have any other questions. Sorry, didn't mean to confine you. Also possible you're not able to participate, that's fine. Okay. Holding space. Is there anybody else who would like to be able to weigh in here? We haven't heard, Mr. Green, Mavis. If you have any other questions or comments you'd like to offer? Here's something.
I just have my good news to share.
Oh, yes, Liz has some good news that she would like to share with us all. Oh, wait, Elena, I see you've unmuted.
Yes, it took me a while.
I'm so sorry.
Have any block party or special event permits been approved for Oakland for April or May, since this is party season?
I do not believe so, no. I'm looking at our calendar now, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's a no.
Okay, thank you.
And since you brought it up, just if you look in the chat, I dropped a link in there for our public events calendar through eApproval. That's a new thing we have now since we switched permitting vendors. Anything that gets a special event permit from our office can appear on that calendar. And I say can because there is an opt-out option. Sometimes we get permits for weddings in public space and they don't want them on the calendar. So there has to be an opt-out option. But the vast majority, if not all, of events that are meant for the public will appear here. Block parties will not. We are working on a way to have a separate block party permit calendar, but you can search keywords, you can search specific dates, you can simply look at it by a day, week, month, or just like a list. But everything that gets a permit for a special event should appear on here unless the applicant opted out during the application process. So that's a new resource we have if anyone wants to bookmark that. It's there for you to have. It's findable through our website, but also just straight up with that link right there.
Thank you. Liz has something.
Yeah, no, I just have a little bit of good news. The anti-litter inspector positions have been posted on the city's website. So the jobs are posted, there are 10 positions, and hopefully they will get filled quickly, and we will move forward with quality of life ticketing, which will make a vast difference to the community
You're here,
and me.
right? So, yeah, Mavis, I'm echoing your comment that it is curious that there is no age requirement on the application. If it's not within the city's ability to say you have to be 18 or 21 to be able to apply for a permit, then perhaps it wouldn't be too much to ask for, you know, a scan or a photocopy of somebody's official identification, so that just for the information of the office to verify identity, maybe to even verify residence. You know, especially if you're a renter, there's nothing at present that the city would have available to verify that that's where somebody lives. So potentially, if you could be presenting, you know, a driver's license or any other kind of official ID that shows your address and birth date, then that seems like a reasonable ask of an applicant.
We do ask address, we just don't ask age. Applicants and all that.
You don't seem to have any, you don't seem to have any requirement that somebody provide proof that they live there. So like you asked.
Only for block parties, general events, there is no requirement of residency.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but I'll double check on the age thing. I'll ask our law department about that because, you know, if something we can do, we can look at it.
Okay. Thank you. So this, you know, in terms of the special events in residential areas, I'd just like to be able to reiterate that though it is not the case that you require that the applicant be resident, and that's reasonable, right? There might be an organization that would like to be able to sponsor an event in an area. I don't think that it's crazy in a residential neighborhood as opposed to in you know, more mixed use street to require of an event organizer that they notify the residents and that there be some indication that that's been done, right? Because otherwise, any random organization can just like pick a block somewhere in the city and say, I want to have my event here. And then like, there's nothing that you would be able to do to verify that that was okay with the people who live there, because it can sometimes be a distinction without a difference, whether it's a special event or a block party. In some circumstances. So, but anyway, thank you all very much for your time and your participation. We really value your input, and we will definitely be following up on a lot of the things that we discussed here. Not just with the folks who are on this call, but with the rest of our neighbors and our city representatives as well. So thank you all. Appreciate it. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take
Have a
care,
good night.
everyone.
Good night, everyone.